Well, it's glad to be back with you. It's glad to talk about some things, but often in the range of just talking to my family, we have our Zoom meetings for lunch, etc. Questions come up, and I still use a tax list to answer many questions today. So join me as we look at how to use a tax list to answer questions today. Well, depending on how long you've researched, you may or may not have used a property tax list or a personal property tax list or a poll tax list to actually find ancestors or find people that you're researching. And one of the great things that we can use to identify house histories or where a piece of property was, we can follow the tax list over time, and we can still use it today. So I want to show you an example of how a thing came up of me trying to figure out about a house where we lived when I was a little kid, of when we moved into that house. And I want to show you how a tax list really helped resolve that problem. Okay? You're going to be surprised at how helpful these things really can be in just regard of just answering simple questions. Okay? So the point was, by the way, yes, that is adorable little me. And that is in the house. We call it the brick house. That's the brick house that we moved into. When did we move into our brick house? My parents bought it. It wasn't me. In Cedar Hill, Tennessee. I remember we were there in my head in 1960. But if I go to the deed was recorded in 1961. And I'll show you there was a couple other ways to resolve that. But I wanted us to look at it this way. Okay? And that it's not a great picture, but that is of the time period. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I went to the 1961 tax list. Now, this is available on Family Search, and I'll show you how to get to most tax books. They're not extant for every place, by the way, and maybe that they've not been filmed everywhere, but you'll find that a lot have been done. And many of those that have been filmed are available on Family Search, or you might have to look at a local tax office. We'll talk about that as well, how to use that. But this is the tax book for the 8th Civil District. That's where we grew up. That's where I grew up in Tennessee. My dad was J.W. Lowe. So if you go down, I'm looking for that property of this property in the 1961 tax book. So if you'll go down to J.W. Lowe, there on line number 10, it shows that what's adjacent to him, but that is not the house that we purchased. That is my dad's business, with a church on one side, Mr. Ayers on the other, insurance company owning the front section, and the Woodards. That is my dad's business, our feed mill. That is not the house. And so that's in 61. Now I already have the deed, and they signed the deed in March of 61. But I kind of remember being there when I turned 4, which would have been 1960. I'm telling you exactly how old I am. And so I remember the person who owned the house was Mr. Sneed, was the Sneed family. So if I flipped on over just to the S's, and when I looked at R.P. Sneed, then guess what? Lowe had been written over that property. That is our house. What I'm trying to show you, a couple of things in regard to a tax list. It is not uncommon that whoever's going through the tax list may find that a property has been sold in the time period, or they're going to make other notes, and they'll often make them right either in the tax book, or in some cases there are assessment ledgers or assessment books that the people go around when they're checking off the property, and they may make the notes in there. Now, many of those may not be filmed. They might be available in the tax assessor's office or in the trustee's office, or a PVA, property value assessors in Kentucky, wherever the assessment of property is kept. And so in this case, notice that I can tell that Lowe was, the notation was added to the tax list for the 61 year. That makes sense. And that's probably, if I find the deed, it would find the notation. But notice that by going to the name, it was not under Lowe. It was under Sneed, who was the previous owner. Again, If you didn't know that, you would have had the deed perhaps as a reference. But there are many other ways to double check this. Now, I want to also let you know that many states, including Tennessee, have current property tax maps with GIS, or ways for you to actually see current property. And I'm going to show you a couple of the ways that those are that way. This is the current property as it stands today. It's kind of blue over on the right, and I've added who were the owners at the time period when my parents bought the property. And you'll notice on the 61 tax book it says the highway. So on the north side up there, that's Highway 41, U.S. Highway 41, also called the Dixie Beeline Highway. That was the route from Chicago to Miami. So it was a busy highway growing up. You can't really see the house. The house is in the upper port. They actually have a swimming pool, and there's a building back there now that was built while we lived there. So it's kind of laid out different. But if you'll notice, on the south side at the bottom, the Davidsons lived up. That was uphill, by the way, on the big house on the hill behind us. Now that's currently the property that my brother and sister-in-law live in an old house that was built about 1852, or prior to that, and it was modified in 52. So that's where the Davidsons lived when I was a kid. Okay, on the east side, there to the right as you're looking at it, there's a house there, and then beyond that house, that was all owned by Borman Stratton Oil Company. That was out of Cheatham County. They owned the gas station, so there was a gas station over there, and then they owned that house, and that was where my neighbors who ran the gas station, Mr. Armstrong and Ms. Armstrong, that's where they lived. Okay, and then on the west side of that property, that big pasture that was there, when I was a kid, it had pigs in it at times, it had cattle in it. That was Mr. Wynn, Mr. Pat Wynn's property. So if we're looking whether modern, now remember this is 61, you can kind of do the same thing to take a modern piece of property, and if you have the ability to look at the map, I have annotated the information as to property owners from the 61 tax book, and of course my memory as well. But I actually was able to look up that tax book on Family Search, and then I was able to pull up the property data from the Tennessee property data page, and that link is there for the assessment for Tennessee. Now you can just type Tennessee property data or Tennessee property tax data, and it'll come up and you choose by county. It requires a little bit of effort, but that's a great opportunity. Now for me, lots of memories about running around that property and what it was like to grow up in that house. We lived there for until I went off to college, so many more years at that point of living in that house, and it's still there. The house is still standing. We have friends who live in that house today, but I was about 4 years old, or about the time I turned 4 years old. Now, interesting, it's cool enough. I have on a little sweater. I'm talking on a phone. Remember, that's what phones look like. It was a big old heavy phone. I'm standing. I don't know what kind of hat I've got on. I've got a cap. It's not a beanie. It looks like a beanie. But on the side, there was a picture. This was made probably in December of 1960. I would have turned 4. And so it confirmed my memories. But my dad did not sign the deed until March of 61. So the confusion was they didn't finish the closing on the property. We had probably lived in, and so in reality, we probably moved in on Labor Day weekend of 1960. And that's kind of what's in my memory, and my siblings can't remember the details. We kind of find it hard to believe that we moved into the house and none of us remember moving. And I found this picture after the discussion when I had looked on the tax list for more information. But anyway, by the way, if you're looking for Kentucky's tax information is property value assessments, or assessors, PVAs, the short term. And this is a link to many of the Kentucky PVA offices. Now, not every county in Tennessee has what I just showed you, nor does every Kentucky county have it, but there are many. And so if you go here, that site, then you have the ability to pull up a county. And I just pulled up Allen County, and then you can search by location or address. You can search by name, and there's several ways to do a search across it. And all I did was I just pulled up someone named Lowe. Don't know them, They're not related necessarily. In fact, so I just pulled up their property. And what's interesting about this is it shows the property, it shows the current address, and then it will show the characteristics of what subdivision it's located, if it is in one, the kind of siding, if it's smooth property, the topography is steep in this case. And we can scroll down. This is called a property tax page. And if you went into the PVA office, you could actually look at probably a printed card like this, although they may do them electronically now. They do here. They did have the old cards. And so then it'll explain more about the improvement on that property. And often will tell you about how many bedrooms, how many floors, the square footage, lots of information. And although we don't have this to go back, say, 150 years, some places have lots of detail in their taxes. And in that transitional period, if there are old property tax cards, they're probably not filmed. But if you have access to the current one, they'll tell you like when this house was built. This one was built, according to this, in 1969. It has 2,270 square foot of living space. So it's a lot of information. The second section at the bottom is the last sales. And so the last deed recorded on this was 94, and it has the deed book and page number. And then there was also a reference in 70. It's the same people, but just a transfer of property. And so you actually sometimes have multiple. It'll actually list the deed book and page. And if not, if those aren't accessible, then they're available typically through the county court clerk in Kentucky. And you can determine, actually, sometimes you can order those, and many of those are digital and available online. So again, if it's available on Family Search, check there first. Okay, let's scroll on down a little bit more. Kentucky has this. Tennessee, not every county has this. There's a picture of the house, fairly current, and then there's a sketch of the layout, which is done usually in the assessment process. That's a lot of information. And so if you're looking for an old house that's part of your property and you want to track the property and the land, this is a great way to get started. That's exactly what I was kind of doing in regard to our house. We really just trying to figure out when it was we moved. Now you can also look, somebody in the process of this, we're talking about, well, how, I can tell you when a house was built or when a house burned. And you can follow the tax list over time. So you figure out which property it is. And if you go back and you know the owners, then you can actually look. This is a tax assessment book. These are usually handwritten, and this is what the tax assessors who are doing it for the various areas, they probably have the book, and then they make the notations in the book. They'll copy down the data from last year, and then they'll make the notations. You'll notice here, this is E.L. Benton, which is that name at the very top, and there are two parcels on E.L. Benton, and built another house in addition to that house that was there, add a $400 value. Okay, so then I should be able, so in other words, within that tax year, I can actually figure out which property that went on because the value of that house would have been added. Okay, if a house was burnt and they built a new house, then I can actually sometimes find the increase in the value from one year to the next if you're trying to figure out when a house burned or when a house was built. Sometimes those notations will actually be written on the tax list because if a house was burned and was not rebuilt, then the value of that house wouldn't be carried over to that next year. And so if it took a while to rebuild. So you'll be amazed what's found within that. This is the tax assessment book. This one's not available online. I just had a copy of this one to give you an example. But I could actually go to the 1907-1908 taxes for this same county, which is the big book. So you go to FamilySearch.org. You do a search using the catalog. Within the catalog, you're going to use Tennessee and the county. That's to get to this one. And then once you choose Robertson County, Tennessee, and select, then you're going to select the taxation tab, and that's going to highlight two things that are available. One is a book by Jim Douthit about 1836 taxes, but the tax books for Robertson County have been filmed and are generally available digitally from 1867 through 1964. Okay, and so if I click there, it's going to take me to the various years, and then that's what I did is selected the 1907 tax list for the 9th Civil District. So you see the difference. This one is typed, the other one's handwritten. That second piece of property, you'll notice that what they did is they added that property is 700, so they added 400 to that piece of property. And so again, I can find that. It also, notice there's a notation of administrator of Patty, and so I need to look at a little detail on that. It also, notice that the owners could have changed of the surrounding properties, and so sometimes just looking at these gives me that information and lets me find, what I'm trying to find, what I'm trying to look for, where the information might be located. So it's amazing. I think it's amazing what a tax list will show you today or yesterday. The whole point is use the tools that we have. We're all kind of shut in right now. You want to look at something new, go find a piece of property that you know existed. If you have the deeds, then look at the years. Then go look at Family Search, go to the state, and if it's a house, look to see how that state and how that county handles their property tax list, their property tax maps, like PVA or the trustee here. Are those available online? And many jurisdictions have made those things available where you can currently look at a house. You can do things using some of the real estate tools to find pictures of a house. So if you used to live there and you want to say, okay, let's just look at the houses where we lived in our lifetime. That's how this started with my siblings, by the way. It was in the process of when did we move into that brick house. And it's amazing how many stories have come out from our discussions of an old house that we once lived in. I would encourage you to take a look at what's available. Look at the tax list. You'd be amazed how many questions it will answer. And so I just want you to take some time and do a little investigation to find out what's available. And then the next time that you need an answer, the tax list might be the place that has the answer for you. Okay? Good luck. If you're enjoying this, let me know. Subscribe. And we're going to start trying to do some regular classes all the time, new sessions. Make comments. Let me know what it is you'd like to hear and learn from me. And again, I hope you're doing good. Stay safe. And looking for you the next time we're around. But in the meantime, go find out about those tax lists. If you don't look, you won't know the answer. Good luck.